I can now present my own personal understanding that has enabled me to reconcile belief in the Creator with our present understanding of scientific discoveries. In a short presentation such as this series of talks, I can only hope to summarize my approach to this important question. It is extensively expanded in my provocatively titled book, God by Evolution. This explains how I personally reconcile an ancient Big Bang universe that contains evolutionary processes with God as the Creator. Regardless of how changes may have occurred in the universe over the billions of years since the Big Bang creation, God is not the God of the gaps. He is intimately involved in every law and process and event. Thus, in reality, to someone who believes in God, it does not really matter exactly how changes take place, provided our concept of God is great enough. The key to reconciling science and faith is a big enough concept of God. The discovery of mechanisms in no way removes the need for a designer of the mechanisms, nor for ongoing involvement of the designer in these processes. Discovery of mechanisms does not alter my conviction that God is in all things, through all things, and by Him all things are held together. With reference to the genetic upgrades in the evolution of life, we should ask who or what mediates these sudden advances. I suggest that it is ultimately the mind of the Creator that caused these viable changes. My theistic evolution concept has no problem when science comes up with more details of how processes such as evolution actually work. Describing mechanisms and stages of a process in no way proves or disproves the existence of a designing mind. Both options are taken or rejected by faith. However, when we take the whole spectrum of evidence for intelligent design, the weight of evidence comes down very strongly on the side of the designer. Furthermore, our present understanding of quantum physics and the timeless dimension enable us to grasp not only the possibility, but actually the probability that God was and is in total control. I am proposing that God is the mind behind all the amazing coincidences and fine-tuning of the universe, and He is the mind behind all the intricate design in nature. God operates in and through the timeless dimension that is independent of time and independent of locality, and He is simultaneously aware of every minute detail of creation. He is able to influence outcomes by imposing initial conditions onto the so-called quantum chaos. This is achieved through the power of His supermind over matter. In this way, He is able to direct and determine what outcomes materialize within the confines of laws He has ordained. This controlling of outcomes by mind power is probably the normal way that God controls the day-to-day running of the universe. In addition, whenever necessary, God may have intervened in a similar way to the biblical description of His intervention at the creation of Eve from Adam's genetics. In other words, at intervals, He could have undertaken genetic engineering and jump-started existing life forms in new directions. The most likely candidates for genetic engineering interventions were those situations that required development of greater complexity. These are the genetic upgrades that led to increasing the amount of genetic material and the creation of more complex creatures. How can the human mind know when and where God has intervened and guided the outcomes of the laws that He has planned and brought into existence? Scientists may speculate on how one life form has changed into another due to a slight change in the arrangement of base pairs in the DNA genetic code. Or we may say that at a stage in evolution, a so-called Hox gene triggered a sudden change in the function of a segment of existing genetic code. From the human observer perspective, he may think that he or she has worked out exactly how the one life form has changed into another. However, from God's perspective, He knows that this change took place because He imposed the power of His mind and triggered the biological processes that led to that change. I propose that God thought, and it came to pass. He used laws of physics, genetics, the environment, and whatever else He needed. We can sometimes trace the steps, but we cannot, as scientists, pronounce a verdict on whether or not there is the who guiding the processes. Some scientists may not believe that God is behind the processes, but they cannot logically or scientifically rule out this possibility. I believe that some scientists and some believers in God need a major shift in thinking. To the believer in God, I would suggest that your concept of God is often much too small if you believe in a God waving magic wands and initially creating all things in 6 literal earth days. To the scientist, I would suggest that your interpretation needs to take into account the limitations of the scientific method and your inability to analyze the timeless, non-localized God who is in all things, through all things, and by whom all things are held together. This God operates through the timeless energy matrix of the timeless dimension that is the powerhouse of the universe and is characterized by non-locality, entanglement, instant universe-wide awareness, and instant universe-wide interrelatedness. I propose that each time God intervened, He took existing creatures, rearranged their DNA, and jump-started evolution to a new level of complexity. These creatures still had the inherent capability of genetic variability, mutation, and environmental adaptation. In this scenario, the end products seen today would also share the same chemistry and similarities of structure. This jump-starting to new levels of complexity could be the result of God exerting His mind power into the situations, thus imparting direction into so-called quantum chaos, resulting in development of pre-calculated outcomes, or God's involvement could at times include a more hands-on genetic engineering intervention similar to that which He undertook at the creation of Eve. I am suggesting that people who believe in a 6-day creation, and also many scientists, have become confused because both have failed to consider options that they feel will not fit into their worldview. Some believers in God have thought that acceptance of evolutionary processes would mean that God was not involved and that their whole faith structure seemed threatened by scenarios with long periods of time. On the other hand, some scientists thought that the involvement of a God option was unscientific. Where some scientists have decided to rule out the God option, this is sometimes because evolution theory has become for some people the religion of the unbeliever. Just as some believers in God have ignored facts that do not suit their interpretations, so have some scientists ignored facts that do not fit their basic assumption that God has to be irrelevant. I personally accept that God is the master geneticist and He has always been intimately involved with His creation. The account of the creation of Eve gives the believer in God the vital clue by which to understand one of the ways that God could have worked throughout the evolution of life. Whenever He saw the need to intervene other than by exerting the power of His mind, He could have undertaken some more hands-on genetic engineering and guided life in a new direction. In addition, within each species, God implanted the ability to change within the limits of their genetic complexity to adapt to changes in the environment. Thus, we see abundant examples of variation and speciation within a particular family of creatures, but we do not see step-by-step changes from one level of genetic complexity to another level of complexity. This theistic evolution model has no problems with science progressively discovering details of the steps that have occurred during evolutionary processes and during the long ages of geological history. I believe my God is aware of all these processes and, I am convinced, is intimately involved in every detail. The amazing variety of life forms are all needed in order to maintain the balance of nature. The study of ecology shows us how this balance of nature needs a complex web of predators and prey in each of the so-called ecological niches. These ecological niches vary from deep sea volcanic vents to ocean seas, to coastal waters, to arid lands, to well-watered lands, and a host of other situations. If I was the creator, I would have greatly enjoyed guiding evolutionary processes towards the overall aim of a balance in nature.